Welcome everybody to this early stage investment panel at the SACS conference. We are very well prepared to talk about early stage investments, and we think we are the most important piece of the biotech system, because if there was no early stage investments, then there would be no companies to invest in later on and no drugs on the market. So stay tuned for this very important and exciting panel. And we will just do a quick round of introduction. And I will just mention the panelists, and then they will introduce themselves, and I'll try to do it in the order on my screen. So I will ask John to start out.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Baker. I'm Senior Vice President at Abcam. We are a provider of proteomic tools and reagents to companies throughout their life cycles, from early stage through to maturity. In that activity, we also invest in early stage technology companies that we think are of interest to the life science market. Very much looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. And Lior?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Lior Teitelbaum. I'm Chief Business Officer for FutuRx. We're a biotech incubator based in Israel, founded by Johnson & Johnson, Takeda Ventures and Orbit Partners, and with an investment from Bayer's Leaps Corporate Venture. And we do company formation and incubation and seed investment in novel therapeutics-based companies.
And Michael?
Yeah, my name is Michael Altorfer. I'm the CEO of the Swiss Biotech Association. As an association, we cater for the 1,000 plus biotech companies in Switzerland, working for an optimal framework, ensuring that they have access and growing talent pool. Access to funding is, of course, a big topic, and also efficient technology transfer. As such, I'm not on the panel as an investor, but I can observe the market. I see trends, and I'm happy to contribute to this discussion.
And Pierre-Jean?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Pierre-Jean Wipff. I work for Innovaud, which is a state organization from the canton of Vaud, one of the cantons of Switzerland, which is around the Lake of Geneva, or Lake Léman. I'm not an investor myself either. Innovaud is an economic promotion agency, and our job is to make sure that the high-tech companies, and especially in life sciences, are best supported by all type of organizations that are active around, including, of course, financing organizations. There's quite a lot of public players here who are active at the seed stage. So again, I don't have the pure views of a VC, but still, we try to help companies at a very, very early stage.
Good. Sophia?
Hi everyone, my name is Ioannidou, and I'm a partner with Andera Partners. So Andera Partners is an investor. We have a venture capital activity that focuses on life sciences. We do 2/3 of our investments in biotech, 1/3 in medtech, across therapeutic areas and across modalities as well. And in terms of stage, we can go early, so we can do from seed, Series A investments up to late, that is phase 3 or registration ready companies.
Okay, and my name is Søren Møller, and I'm the managing partner for Novo Seeds, which is the early stage investment team in Novo Holdings. We are a big life science investor and invest across seed, venture, growth equity, and principal investments. In the seed team, we build companies either from academic spinouts or proactively seeking assets that we think are interesting and build companies around. We have about 25 portfolio companies today. So we look forward to this panel, and welcome everybody. The first topic that we discussed that we wanted to talk about here in the team is where to start. How do we start building new biotech companies? And there's, of course, many models to do this. There is venture creation where funds do their own incubation and build companies, but there's also a wealth of incubators around where entrepreneurs can work with professional people and build companies. And maybe as we have Lior on the team, you can kick it off by describing your model and how you work with early stage companies.
Sure thing. Thanks, Søren. So at FutuRx, our focus is company formation, only in biotech, but across modalities and indications. We typically look at projects at very early stages. So typically those are academic stage projects. We scout globally and look for interesting projects which mainly need to have some validation of a novel mechanism of action. And from there, we can take them through translation, discovery, and development. The two main models that we apply are company creation around IP, know-how, and patents that we identify in academia around the world. We create the company locally in Israel. We build a team, an R&D focused team around it within the company that we create. And we support that team, that company in the incubator for 3 years with an investment, facility, lab, etc. And also, and that's an important element, a lot of know-how, expertise, and hands-on roles that we as the incubator take for this company and all the non-R&D activities. Another model that we recently started applying is the Novo venture formation altogether, where we, FutuRx in this case, identify an interesting target, hard-to-drug target in that case, and we partner with a discovery partner to create a company. So late in December last year, we created A2I Therapeutics together with Atomwise, which is an in silico drug discovery company, where we brought a target that was of interest to us, hard-to-drug target in immuno-oncology, and we applied their in silico expertise together with our in vitro and in vivo expertise to create novel drugs. So those are the two main routes that we go in company formation.
Yeah, super interesting. Could you sort of talk about pros and cons, or what's good, which types are good for what model?
Sure thing. So first of all, we are trending more and more towards platform-based companies these days. Originally we started with a lot of focus on single assets for single targets, and now we're more and more platform-based. And I would say in a platform-based project where the science plays a major part, we want to have a close connection with the academic group. And there, it's important for us, even though the academic group does not hold any day-to-day roles within the company, it's important for us to keep them close and work with them jointly on developing the science and validating the science as we progress. So one important thing for us is that we don't need to invest a lot of capital in building a full team. We just build an R&D focused team, and we cover a lot of the functions of the Novo from the accumulated knowledge in our team and in our investors' team's expertise. But we still do need to complement the companies with KOLs and strong academic experts that will be the champions of the science in many cases. And I would say for single assets or for single assets of interest, then doing everything to know without an academic group can work, assuming that we really do have the partner to design a therapeutic compound together with.
Interesting. Maybe Michael or Pierre-Jean, you can talk about the many different models of incubators around Switzerland and how they operate in their model, and how you see them growing actually.
Maybe I start and just
go on.
Talk about the overall picture, and then Pierre-Jean is certainly better positioned to talk about the direct support from his perspective. If we look at the industry, we basically have 4 areas where new companies are being formed from. The classic one is the spin-outs from the universities. The second one is, as you mentioned, venture-based formation of companies, often actually starting as virtual teams, not even creating a company just yet, but experienced management team that starts off the companies. The third one is companies that relocate from other locations to Switzerland, and the last one is the spin-offs from pharma companies. So all these four types can lead to the formation of a new emerging biotech, and of course we need to support these different models in different ways. And I'm sure Pierre-Jean, you can talk to how you cater for that and how you support these different models.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Indeed, there are many different sources of innovation for new biotechs. I will specifically talk about the model that we have in Vaud, but it's again very, very dependent on the geography, and even inside the country, it's very dependent on how on the paradigm of innovation. But in the canton of Vaud, basically, there is a strong support for companies who spin out from universities, and there is a substantial amount of money which is available if you are collaborating with universities to mature your technology. From even switching fundamental sciences to applied sciences, to proof of concept, to maturation, et cetera, there's almost 500,000 which is available if you stay in the laboratory. And then when the company is created, of course, it has to get out of the company because there would be too much of conflicts of interest. And there are different possibilities of hosting. In the canton of Vaud, we have a dedicated technopark called the Biopole. And in the Biopole, there is an incubator called Start Lab. And here is a pay-as-you-go solution. So you have an idea, you have a little bit of funds to pay your bench, and basically the setting is an open space lab where everything is made to be the cheapest as possible and affordable for companies to make their basic experiments there. And again, there is an agreement or memorandum of understanding with universities around, so that the companies can still collaborate with the universities to have access to more complex core facilities to mature their technology. So here, indeed, the paradigm is more organized towards a prolonged collaboration with the universities.
And I think, one aspect of this incubation and building a new company is the infrastructure that it has access to, but it's also the team and the people and the expertise that is applied in these early phases. And so, I think maybe I know, Lior, you have some strong or good insights into that, and before maybe you can chip in there, and then I want to ask Sophia and John how they view these products coming out of these incubators. But so just mindful of time.
Sure. So happy to elaborate a bit about how the team building efforts that we do. So for each company that we create, we hire a team. These are scientists that will lead the R&D efforts of the company. So we typically don't have CEOs at the beginning of incubation. We hire CSOs who are postgraduate level scientists with industry expertise, and they're supported by scientists who do a lot of the bench work. And the idea is to keep the teams very efficient and small and focused, but also to have a lot of the scientific know-how and expertise needed for the project. And we really try to cherry pick the scientists based on the topic of the program. So let's say if a program deals with Wnt pathway inhibitor, we'll pick a scientist who's done her PhD on Wnt pathway to be the leader of the company, especially if she has some industry expertise as well. Really, since the team is small, we want every member to count and to give the benefit of their background. And then we support them, as I mentioned, with our expertise. So part of my role is to be the CBO of all of our portfolio companies. We have a CTO who does all of the strategic R&D planning for the companies. But then the companies, as they work, also works with them on a weekly basis to analyze the data and pivot, et cetera, and plan the next steps. So some aspects there are more similar to what a big biotech would look like, with a CTO with different project groups working with it. And since we invest a lot in the team building and their upskilling, if a company fails, which happens, we take the good teams and move them to the next company. So we really try to maintain our investment and leverage our investment in the human capital so it goes the furthest it can.
Yeah, and I'm sure that all the Swiss incubators also think about, how to bring in the best teams to these projects. And maybe Sophia, over to you on what is a good, what do you look for when a company comes to you out of potentially an incubator?
So the criteria are always the same in what we look for in a company, and I guess very similar to yours, Søren. But we look at the asset, we look at the team, and we look at the overall financial equation as we're a VC. Obviously, for the earlier stage investments and companies coming out of an incubator, that would likely be a seed or a Series A round. The criteria are slightly different. So I would say that, for a seed investment, probably the minimal that we would look for is the concept, to have a medically relevant and differentiated concept, some good initial data, FTO, ideally some initial IP, but not necessary. So FTO for sure, and then some sort of project lead. So likely, as Lior described, not the full team, but somebody who's dedicated to the project and can take it forward. So I would say that this is the minimal that we would need for a seed stage investment. And then we can talk about Series A later if you want.
Yeah, I think we, maybe from our side, we try to, or we are investing in and building relationships with entrepreneurs and residents that we sort of work with on certain opportunities to build them even further. So try to bring in the right management even from the beginning, because this is right for some projects, because we see that this greatly facilitates execution, fundraising, ability to do the right thing quickly. But of course, it's also more expensive from an investment perspective to hire in the right people from the get-go, where they may not have a full-time job actually, because it's very early stage project and science goes slowly. So we try to maybe have some good people close to us that can work on more than one project, and I think it's similar to what you're describing, Lior. But John, maybe I'll go to you and ask you. So, in your sort of investments, where do they come from? Also, what do you look for? Do you build relationships with incubators, or how do you get deals to you?
Yeah, I think we have two flavors of relationships with these sorts of companies. First up, if they are in the proteomic space or playing with proteins at the bench, they're almost certainly using tools that we provide. So one of our questions as we're thinking about as they're spinning from academia into the commercial space, how do we help them be thinking early about things like FTO that Sophia mentioned? How do we help them get continuity of access to materials and tools and reagents, assays that they need for their early experiments? And that can be easier in incubator settings where we have standing agreements with those incubators or with those tech transfer offices, parks. So those sorts of relationships we find can be helpful. When it comes to investment, as a biotech focused primarily on early stage preclinical and then into DX, what we're looking for is companies, typically platforms, that one often will have good use for the tools we provide and where we think we can provide them a differential value beyond cash. So where we think being closely involved with them can help them grow. And we're also then looking for technologies that they may be primarily focused on a therapeutic application, whereas we can see an application for taking that technology out to the global research community or the diagnostic space. So we're very focused on the specifics of the technology and its application in our particular niche. And we've built some nice relationships there, whether it's coming out of big pharma, the likes of Roche, or whether it's coming out of VC-backed or indeed academically backed IP portfolios. So it tends to be a relationship that comes out of our supply and partnership relationships with those companies.
Good. Let me, I think, good discussion on different models and incubators. We, at the panel preparing, we discussed, the big topic of the year, namely the pandemic and how that has influenced, the ecosystem for startups. High level, at least the biotech industry is doing well. Lots of interest in the public markets, and maybe we have also contributed to solving the problem of the pandemic by developing all these vaccines. I can't say that our seed investments has done anything there, but at least the industry as such has been a big contributor. So any comments from what do you see in your portfolio, and are companies struggling? Are they doing well? Can they raise money? I don't know who wants to chip in first.
I can start.
Go, Lior. Yeah.
So I would say this is divided into two parts or two sub eras. I think at the beginning of the COVID situation, we tried, as a lot of our work is done with China-based CROs, we had some initial delays in the progress of our companies, but then they came around and actually doubled the rate. So all in all, we don't see any major delays in development in our companies, and we try to be as prudent as we can with capsule models, etc., so that the infection situations will not put everyone in lockdown. On the fundraising side, although the volume of discussions we have and the context with investors have not been affected and even have improved a lot, people are more attentive and have more times and are spending less time on the airplanes, so we can schedule calls quicker and earlier. Eventually, I would say that interactions that didn't start in the real world will have a hard time materializing into a real investment. So with those investors that we were in contact before, we managed to have follow-on deals. We managed to add a partner to the incubator, mainly by Zoom, but a lot of that was done started off in the real world. Now that we're starting interactions virtually, I would say that this can get a bit harder for the next round of fundraising that we're looking for.
And at least what do you think, Sophia, about virtual diligence?
Yeah, I was going to bounce on Lior's comment. First of all, maybe the question of what was the impact of COVID on the portfolio companies. So we have companies that are at the preclinical stage that probably had the same experience as what Lior described, and then a number of companies that are more clinical, and there is a clear impact on the timeline. So we have seen delays of 3 months, sometimes 6 months, just because the hospitals are reprioritizing their activities and recruitment in clinical trials is not happening as it did before. Having said this, the fundamentals of these businesses stay as they were. So we haven't seen a translation of this issue into refinancing problems or any of the like. So we've been able to participate in new financing, but also in refinancing of our existing portfolio companies throughout 2020 and this year with no issues. I do concur with what Lior said, which was that I think that in all situations that I can think of, the interactions with other investors when it was about refinancing of our portfolio companies, or the interactions with us with new companies when it came to new investments, had started in the real world, even though they finished in the virtual world. So this is true. It will be more difficult to do everything virtually from A to Z, but I think that we'll just have to adapt, because it looks likely that the situation will drag on for a bit more. So we're pragmatic people and we'll adapt. I do think that there is a possibility that earlier stage companies might suffer a bit more than later stage, because the interaction between management and investors is somewhat more important at those earlier stages than there is at the later stages, when the company is more on the rails, the development path is clear, the commercial model is clear. So I do instinctively, although I have no data, I think that it may be slightly more difficult for the early stage.
Yeah, maybe I can comment on that. I think at least from what we have seen in a couple of Series A investments is that they have actually started virtually and will conclude virtually, and they are significant investment rounds with investors that do not normally invest or have not previously invested in our geography, you can say. So I think there has been, we closed a round in Biotech that was, a very a big investment, and several parties joined that came in virtually and concluded virtually. I do think that it helps that relationships among current investors and new investors help bring comfort to this virtual diligence. So from my perspective, at least the virtual diligence or the virtual process has facilitated and perhaps taken geography out of the equation for some companies. And I know, Michael, you also have a point on at least for the early stage companies, the data that is missing may be a drag on financing in the future. So we want to hear that point of view also.
Yeah, I mean, the perspectives or the observation we have is twofold as well, in the sense that, frankly, 2020 was a record year. We've never had as much funding, and in particular also early stage as well. But I always caution that the majority of these transactions, whether it's been IPOs or private rounds or partnerships with pharma, have typically still been based on data generated prior to the pandemic, and it's only been in the second or the final quarter of 2020 when we really started these delays that you have sketched out, that we've seen exactly the same. It's 3 to 6 months on the preclinical side. It's 6 to, in worst case, even more than a year on the clinical side, started to delay the financial closings that were planned. But I believe we all will see how this works out in the pretty much the next 6 to 9 months. And the question is, are the investors willing to build that bridge financing that will be necessary so that these companies that have the delays, they have not bad data, they just have no data, and then they will deliver the data a little later so that they can actually deliver what they had promised earlier. And my personal feeling is actually quite positive, because I see that the investor attitude is good. The interest for our industry is certainly as high as probably ever before, and so I'm quite hopeful if we can get out of this lockdown period in a matter of a few months, that actually this can turn out well. Even though I'm cautious and I don't expect 2021 to be as good as 2020.
And how about you, John? Are you willing to follow on in your companies and bridge them?
Yeah, and we have in one recently. We're certainly seeing plenty of enthusiasm for investors in our space, whether that's companies who we partner with or who we're invested in. But I'd absolutely concur that it's the earlier companies that are getting most clobbered on their timelines, I think, for two reasons. One, if they're spin-outs or part-time activities for academics or larger organizations, it tends to be those side projects that are getting booted out when capacity or space is limiting. And indeed, we've had instances of companies that are still hosted in academic labs or academic settings where they've been hit much harder by blanket shutdowns of facilities. And I think for some investors who perhaps are more clinically minded, there's an assumption that everyone's back in the labs and they're trucking along because they're seeing terrific clinical outcomes from late stage. And they're perhaps not as aware that for preclinical or even academically based groups, lab capacity and the ability to actually run experiments is still very limited and will be for a while.
All right. So I also had this notion that geography would we all will become less important because we're all learning how to do even conference panels virtually. But I think we also had a conversation on proximity, meaning at least in the beginning, when a company gets off the ground, proximity and quick iterations with, for instance, inside the incubator and is super important. How do people see this? Can you start a virtual company from over Zoom?
No, I can say that we've over the past year we've incepted 4 companies all through, and we have 6 more in inception stages. So the discussions with the professors and their academic teams are done on Zoom as well as they are done in real life. It's even easier for us when the research group is not in Israel, so that it becomes a non-issue. We're used to do calls at night. As for the team hiring, that also has become easier, scheduling interviews and then doing all of that. I would say the challenge is for the CSOs to come into and start their work virtually. Some of them have come into the office. We came out of lockdown 2 weeks ago, so they came into the office the first time, and they've been working in the company for 3 months. So that's a bit of a new reorientation. But all in all, we haven't seen a problem in setting up a company virtually.
Oh, good. I want to move. Maybe we have about 15 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we also touch upon, what we're all aiming for coming out of the company building efforts, and that is, the Series A that brings in the right money to go to first in man, for instance, and build a broader team, and maybe. So I can hand that ball to Sophia, and you can talk about what would it take to raise 40-50 million euro Series A with participation from Andera.
So yes, I did mention before what was the minimal for a seed investment. I guess for a Series A, we're taking it to the next level here. And again, obviously the concept has to hold and be medically relevant and differentiated, but the data that is required for a Series A has a higher bar here. Also, we'd be looking to have some IP, not simply, the possibility to build some IP. And then also a development plan that is there, and a team, at least an initial team that can get the project going.
So you would not necessarily require a repeat biotech CEO that you.
Well, that's the ideal scenario.
Yeah.
Of course, that's everybody's dream. A repeat biotech CEO who's done it before and he sold his company for $1 billion or has listed it on NASDAQ, of course. But we have to be pragmatic here. And also, I think that, there's some profiles that are actually better for starting a company and not necessarily for taking it all the way through to NASDAQ, where you might need a different profile. Yeah. Therefore, for us, it's important to have an initial team that can get the project off the ground and start running with it. And it doesn't mean that this team will not evolve later, obviously be complemented with new skills, etc.
Yeah. Maybe, I don't know, Lior, if you can comment on that. And I want to make sure that I think from the Swiss perspective, the magnitude of experience in your area, I want to talk about how you draw that into companies, but maybe Lior, what's your what do you see being, where do you aim to bring your companies so they can get out there and raise the big capital?
Sure. So as I mentioned, when we start a company, we look mainly for the science and validation on a mechanistic hypothesis. If there's a candidate compound that's good, not necessary. By the end of the 3 years incubation, we would like to ideally have a lead selected and some in vivo validation or validation in a clinically relevant preclinical model. That's the route, and that's what we aspire to do in 3 years. And in the process of that, we will obviously do campaigns for developing compounds. We will obviously develop assays. We will obviously work on in vivo data, and we will aim to also have all the pharmacology, safety and pharmacology work that's not IND level. So by the end of incubation period, we would like to be about 12 months before IND package. And I'm generalizing here because for gene therapy and cell therapy, that can be a bit different. But for small molecule and antibody-based projects, that's where we want to be, with a good plan that will to take us all the way to clinical proof of concept. And with that, we would like to raise our A round to fund that all the way to clinical proof of concept.
Are there any indication areas that you sort of prefer and dislike? Yeah,
so typically no. We're apart from infectious diseases, which we don't do despite COVID. We are agnostic to indications. Our main criteria for selecting projects is we want to have companies with first-in-class compounds. So we will never do a reformulated or repurposed drug-focused company. We will typically not do a me-better drug. And now we're shifting more and more towards platforms, and platforms can be biological technology platforms, delivery, computational, etc. But also, if you're looking at single assets, we would like to have companies that try and own a pathway, so that even though they have a single asset for a single target, they're the only ones who know that target very well, and they're doing everything related to that, from companion diagnostic development to patient stratification and theories towards that, towards looking at multiple indications and multiple partnerships towards indications, all that's related to that pathway. So even if it's a single asset, we want to have a platform perspective on that.
I think that's a good segue. I want to ask you, John, about platforms, since you are sort of, I guess, more interested in the technology than necessarily the drug, but maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, we're typically, if it's a new platform, we're typically involved very early. So at the stage where they're just starting to toy with those platforms in the academic market, yet alone in the clinical space. And what's interesting to us is helping folks think through how that platform can be applicable from end to end of that discovery journey. So we're particularly interested in helping them think through, well, as Lior says, great, you're thinking about a relevant target to this platform. Have you thought about how that informs the diagnostic strategy as well as potentially a therapeutic strategy, and how we can be part of that? So I think those bridges between the preclinical world or the academic world, where a platform may first be understood, and then how you take what you learn from the academic market to support clinical development, to us is usually exciting. So we try and facilitate that bridge from how do I get my platform understood by KOLs and by the research community, such that there's then a data package that can start to inform clinical application. That's what we're interested in particularly.
Okay, maybe Michael or Pierre-Jean, what do you do with, maybe comment on both the platform aspects, what you see going on in Switzerland, and how you draw upon the vast experience that are in your region?
So unfortunately I cannot I don't have so much expertise in this, but just if I may, we were talking about Series A. I just want to make a little warning when the companies are raising their seed round, especially in biotech, and there's a temptation to access to the most accessible money, which is not always the most valuable. And there are some dangerous situations where the CEOs leverage some money, raises some money at the seed stage, but the business angel or the FFF has no clue about what a biotech company is, and this is a real hurdle when you have to negotiate the further rounds. So I would just like to emphasize that the seed, the way you raise your seed round is very critical. The second thing also is just also on the amount that you raise in your seed, because I saw so many situations where basically the CEO is bootstrapping for 100Ks here, 100Ks here, that he doesn't have the time to focus on his business. So you have to, even at seed stage, focus on the right investors and the right amount so that you can focus on your activities.
As professional seed investors, we like that, of course. So
I think coming back to the four models that I mentioned before, it really, to answer your question, is quite different for all of them, because naturally the spinouts from pharma companies typically come with experienced people, really focusing on a specific asset or a group of assets that come out. So they're often quite independent, whereas the others either seek the environment of an incubator to really have as many partners that can help them to get started. That's certainly the case for the spinouts of universities. But also, surprisingly to me, many of the venture-based virtual teams actually look for that proximity as well. And I think Switzerland is particularly strong in this area, that you have a smooth transition of very small seed funding, access to public-private partnership, either fostered through the innovation agency in Switzerland or through our collaborations within Horizon Europe, and then the follow-on investments. We have seen that this flow is actually very smooth, and since I would say 10-15 years that is working well. I think it gets a bit more rocky when it's then for the later stage larger rounds. There you really have to convince the investors that you have what Sophia has sketched out already. The last ones that come to Switzerland, they typically come because they have established a good management team, but they now want to have the proximity to big pharma, proximity to the manufacturing capacity, and all the specialists, CMC side, etc. Which of course Switzerland has really a wonderful position, given its small but very dense hub that we are offering.
Yeah, I'm mindful about time, so we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to invite the audience to ask questions if there's something we need to discuss, and it works like you just type it in the chat, and we will try to include it. And I think the last topic that we had on our agenda is okay. You have been you've been in your incubator, you've gotten the seed money, but how do you then find your investors? And for the A round and what have you. And we had two conversations on the panel here. One was sort of the platform conversation, and the other one was the relationship. Maybe I'll ask Sophia again to kick it off, and maybe Lior. How do you syndicate your companies?
So how do we syndicate our companies? Well, by reaching out to our co-investor network, of course, in Europe and the United States. So that's how we do it. But we also encourage our companies and the CEOs of our companies to independently reach out to investors in conferences, etc. I think that we probably all know, or at least the investors of us on this panel, Søren, I don't know if you agree with me, but if in your inbox you receive an investment proposal from another colleague that you already know, it's probably more likely that you will look at it quicker than something coming completely on a cold call basis, which doesn't mean that we won't look at the latter, but it will be probably dealt with in less of a priority. Yeah. So, relationships, and we encourage our CEOs to leverage whatever relationships they have. And obviously, we ourselves, we help our companies with our own relationships with co-investors.
Exactly. cautious about time, so I'll move on to Michael and you. I think you brought up the idea of launching a sort of a platform, and just to give everybody the benefit of both views. Please describe it, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, it's not a replacement for what Sophia just explained, but it's really a reaction to an observation that we have in the market. First of all, we do very frequently get foreign investors, foreign pharma companies that say it's fairly difficult to understand what's happening in Switzerland, to get the transparency as to what opportunities there are. And the second element is that both sides, the investors and the biotech companies, are wasting time because they approach the wrong people. Yeah? So until they find out that the investor is not interested in their indication or their development stage, and then everybody needs to be nice to one another and say why they don't want to talk. And so to counter that, our idea is to simply provide a Swiss biotech venture platform where the biotech ventures can give some basic information about their management team, about their portfolio stage of development, and the financing requirements, and potentially planned timelines for closing a round. And vice versa, the investors will be invited to look at that platform, but also provide in simple terms their strategy, so that biotechs can see who could fit, and also be honest about whether actually they can invest now or whether they are just looking for the future.
Yeah, and I think of course it's very good to have this kind of information out there. I think the conversation was that investment. This is a relationship business, and it's very important not to ignore that. Lior, would you concur with that?
Sure. So I would say about half of my work is to create a relationship with investors for the benefit of our existing companies and for the benefit of co-creating companies together, and then facilitating the rounds for those companies. We, as co-investors, or our partners, or the incubator investors as co-investors, but a lot of that relates really to the relationship that FutuRx, the incubator, has with a significant group of investors which have invested in our companies before or have been looking at our portfolio routinely.
So we have one question from the audience, but we don't have much time left. So it's about how do we see softer funding from EU affecting the industry? I don't know if anyone has a view on that. Maybe it's Pierre-Jean. Does that play a role for your incubators, or?
Yeah, definitely. In a few minutes, I think it's an incredible help. We've seen companies receiving significant supports in the range of several millions, and reaching levels of maturity which are incredible without having any VC money in the company. That's
So super important for supporting the early stages of this investment. And of course, the European Investment Fund and are LP in many of the funds in Europe, so also super important. Unfortunately, I think I want to close the session now. Some of us, including myself, have a hard stop. So I want to thank the speakers and the audience for a lively discussion, and we look forward to seeing you again, and hopefully evaluating a lot of great startup opportunities. Just give us a call. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone, and thank you.